Welcome back to Creative Thinkers. Again, my name is Miguel Valenzuela, and I want to thank all of you guys for joining us. As always, we bring you somebody very special. Today, I'm actually bringing you guys an ex-student of mine, or a former student of mine, and he is also a veteran. The reason why I asked him to be on the show is because we're going to actually be discussing a little bit more of the creative side. How does creativity affect us as individuals? How does creativity incorporate itself into your everyday as a student? So I want to welcome you, Emilio.
Hi, nice to be here.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for taking the time to inform us a little bit about what you do. So one of the main reasons why I asked you to be on the show is because I found you as a student very interesting as far as having the ability to think outside the box a little bit more than what I usually see. And that's kind of why I asked you to be on here. And I really see the connection between creativity and what you do on a day-to-day basis. So one of the things that I generally ask some of our guests is, how did you grow up? And you were telling me that your parents are both very creative. So why don't you give us a little background on that?
Absolutely. So both my parents were in the military. That's where they met. But right after they had me, both of them got out. I grew up with my mom here in Texas. Mm-hmm. And then I would fly back and forth between my mom's house here in Texas and my dad in Florida. But the whole family, honestly, is very creative. My mom, everybody kind of cycles through different hobbies. It feels like my mom at one point was restoring furniture. She's now restoring like leather. She's gotten into like leather working recently. And she's made jewelry in the past. My dad has made furniture. He taught himself how to like custom paint his motorcycle. My grandma does like cake designs. My aunt has like scrapbooks and stuff. It just felt like everybody had kind of something that they were always doing or picking up. And so I think that a lot of that came into sort of my mind and my mentality and how I do things.
And I think it's very important that we understand that mindset is a very powerful thing, right? When you allow yourself to think outside the box, which is what this show is a lot about, is, how do we get that mindset? What do these individuals that I interview do in order to be more creative? How do you feel that influenced you? Do you think that it is something that was inherent within you before, or do you think that it was actually helped out by living with creative people?
I think it helped me out a lot. Actually, something that frustrates a lot of my friends is how quickly I tend to pick stuff up. And it's only been recently that I've sort of realized that that's probably because a lot of my family had such varying hobbies and sort of were constantly picking up a new thing and being like, well, how do I figure this out? How do I learn this? And so even in little things, like I recently tried Dance Dance Revolution for the first time, and I was able to pick it up really fast. And one of my friends who plays it like pretty consistently was like, I think you might already be better than me.
Really?
And I think that was just a thing of like, my dad's also really into music, so I have like kind of an ear for music and timing. I've been in various sports, and so I have a lot of resources to pull from, I think, to be able to tackle new problems, if that makes sense.
It does, but I also think that the fact that you have that kind of ability to kind of lay these barriers down before they even exist, right, allows you to gain, I guess, the abilities to do the things that you do. Because one of the things that we did in class, and I try to incorporate it into most of my classes every semester, is I try to ask them riddles. And you actually answered one of what I believe is the most difficult riddle that I give my students very, very quickly. And that's really what kind of spawned this into an interview was, wow, what does this individual, you, Emilio, do in order to kind of have that open-mindedness to answer questions so quickly? And when we started talking, some of the things that you commented on was the fact that you like art, the fact that you're a creative individual, so on and so forth. So I really feel like that is one of the most important aspects of what allows you to do that. And that's what I want to explore with you. How does being creative, how has it helped you in the other things that you've done? You mentioned you were a veteran, so when you were a veteran, what did you actually do, and how did you incorporate this creativity into that? Because it was more technical, right?
Yes.
Yeah, tell us.
I was a Aegis Fire Controlman, which means basically, the way I always describe it is I was a IT-man, or I did IT basically, but for combat systems, for things that ran like radars and computers that ran like weapons control systems and stuff like that. And
Which is extremely technical.
It was
right?
all technical. It was all like a lot of like reading technical publications. It was a lot of going through schematics and looking at how things are wired up. It was a lot of networking at times. But what ultimately I think I shined at specifically was the troubleshooting aspect, specifically when normal troubleshooting wasn't working. So
problem solving in essence.
Yes, exactly. So the thing I always said was that my level of knowledge wasn't great. So I wasn't
Specifically talk about like a schematic or something like that?
I'm
Or
talking
level
about,
of knowledge in which respect?
I'm talking about like I own this system, and so sometimes people of higher rank would come and start asking questions about like, how does this work? How does this work? How does this work?
Oh, okay.
And it would be difficult for me to sit there and not looking at anything, be able to regurgitate that information.
Right.
But when something broke and I could like sit there and be like, okay, this is what I'm looking at. This is what I need to happen. How can I cause that to occur? That was a much easier thing for me. So I was never good at level of knowledge, but I was very confident at my ability to troubleshoot and my ability to problem solve.
So do you think that thinking differently, viewing things differently, your perspective did help you in that respect?
Absolutely. I think actually it was a lot of just knowing that I would be able to, just sort of telling myself I would be able to solve this problem, and then going into it with that understanding, and then sort of, I feel like a lot of people thought very linearly, and I think this is also somewhat how I solved that riddle that you posed to us. Which
literally speaking of lines, because it was based on a line, right?
And so I think that a lot of people would tackle certain problems by being like, this is the issue, where is the solution? But rather than trying to figure out a solution, I was trying to figure out what is supposed to happen, what isn't happening, and then sort of abstract from there what could happen. And like even things that maybe didn't sound like they should make sense, I would be like, well, what would happen if I tried that? And then it sort of just becomes a thing of asking questions of like, well, why can't I try this? Why can't I try that? As opposed to trying to find just one solution and being very honed in on just like the very specific thing that is in front of you, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the interesting aspects of the way that you think, because I feel like you think like an artist, you think like a creative individual. And having said that, let me give you an example. One of the things that people lack, I think, is the ability to evolve their thought process. For example, if I'm walking down the road, I see a leaf or a piece of paper thrown on the ground, I would walk by it and say, oh, it's a piece of paper. I'd acknowledge it, and that's the end of the story, right? But an artist, a creative individual, will look at that and investigate, allow themselves to think further on that thing. So for example, an artist, if they walk by on the road and see a leaf that has fallen from the tree, they may very quickly say, wow, you know what, a leaf, what tree did it come from? They start asking questions, right? Now I know what tree it came from. What can I say about that tree? And that will eventually evolve into a painting, a drawing, a book, a story, a movie even, you know? And we don't know where that will lead. But the thing that I'm trying to do, and that's the reason why I have you on the show, is I try to allow people to better understand how important it is to have this open mind, to allow these ideas to flow freely. And when I saw you actually answer or figure out that riddle so quickly, I was basically in awe. But you say that you were in the military, you got out of the military, and one of the other things that we talked about, because I always do a pre-interview, is we talked about how you changed. So what are you going into now?
So now I'm trying to become a art teacher. I'm trying to become specifically a high school art teacher, though I wouldn't mind like teaching at a higher level than that, or maybe something outside of like a traditional school environment.
So tell us what the process was to get from this kind of very technical military type of thing into this whole more creative aspect.
It actually wasn't easy because I felt like I had a lot of time invested in there. I felt like my resume looked really good, but it was very specifically in like computers, networking, and military technology. And I felt like I had a lot of negative emotions kind of tied to that because the military is difficult, and I definitely had some difficult moments in there that maybe colored that field, I guess, even after I came out. It still felt very fun. I actually really enjoyed that job, but I think I just had too many negative associations. And then I kind of did the same thing of, well, if I'm not happy and I am happy, instead of just sort of looking at what I have in front of me and trying to figure out a solution from there, I tried to it took me a while to get to this point, but eventually I opened up sort of like, well, what if I went in a completely different direction? What would that look like?
Right.
And art was such an important part to my life and such an important thing for me to have in order to get through a lot of those difficult moments in the military. So I looked at art jobs and different art careers, and then I didn't want I originally was just looking at things where I would be making art, but nothing particularly grabbed me. And then I was looking at things more like a curator or something, where I'd be sort of facilitating. And I found the happy medium to be sort of art education, where I'm not necessarily in charge of making anything, but I can kind of flex those creative muscles still through students and sort of help teach them a lot of these things and how to utilize art in the way that I've utilized it and be able to like help themselves, I guess.
Yeah, and one of the things that you said was it helped me get through this, and I utilized art for this. One of the things that you said is because you were having difficulties in the military in certain ways. Everybody has different situations, different ways of viewing and perceiving things, but you said that it helped you get through this. And one of the things that I also talk about in class, in the show, is the importance of how art makes you feel. What did it do for you?
I actually would utilize two different sort of mediums, I guess. I would do a lot of digital art. I had a tablet that I would bring with me out to sea, and I would sit there and I would draw, which was kind of the only way that I got to like decompress. Typically, I would use drawings to make something cool looking or something fun or something just like weird and interesting that I had, or I would draw like a dream that I had, something just to sort of, I guess, play in the space of art. But then I also wrote a lot of poetry and music while I was in also that I don't share with anybody. And I utilized that as a more sort of personal venting of things. So it was a very, there was like one medium that I used very strictly as like, this is how I'm getting these emotions out. And this other medium where I'm like, this is where I get to go to not have to think about anything. And I would even actually, a lot of people take a lot of movies and video games out to see with them because you have a lot of time that you're just trying to kill. I would specifically actually not take anything with me but my tablet, and I wouldn't download anything to it. I would maybe put some music on there so I didn't have like nothing, but I would sort of force myself into situations where the only thing I had to do was to draw or to sit there and write something. Yeah, to create.
Yeah. How do you think that helped you in what you're doing now? Because I feel like from the story that you're telling us, the difficulties were something that you needed to get through. You obviously got through it. I feel like you're an individual that really has a straight head on their shoulder, but you also have that open-mindedness about you, which I really appreciate. I think that when an individual allows those juices, I guess you can call them, to flow, you can become much more successful. Do you think that that's what's going to happen with you? Do you feel that having this way of thinking will eventually allow you to succeed?
I think it already has in a lot of different ways.
Tell us.
I think that one of the like more obvious ones to me from my life is that I used to be very shy. I was very scared of other people, and I remember at one point I had like a metric in my head of like, it takes about 3 months of me consistently being around a person before I'll start talking to them.
Really?
Yeah.
So you could be like in a crowd amongst people, but you won't start talking to X person until you're comfortable enough to do so.
Yeah. So when I got to my ship, I actually like didn't talk to anybody for the first couple of months, even though I was working so closely with them and so heavily. And it took a long time for me to start to like open up to people, and that was just the norm at one point. And that obviously didn't lead to a lot of like professional growth early on, I guess.
Right.
And as I sort of started looking at what I could do differently in the workplace and what I needed actually, I started to see more and more how important it is to be able to talk to somebody and be able to like go up to somebody. And I think that is weirdly a creative decision, just because I feel like that wasn't a decision I would have made before. And now that I'm in like classes with other people,
Right.
I've seen younger people
Kind of go through the same
thing, struggling.
Right.
Where I, for example, had a class where there was something that went wrong on Blackboard. It wasn't even the professor's fault. It was just the actual program messed up. And I didn't know what to do. So I emailed her the project that I was supposed to turn in. And then I also made sure to like contact her through the actual systems on Blackboard on top of that to make sure that she saw it no matter what. And then I went to class and I told somebody, like this younger person about it. And she was like, well, that's a really good idea. I actually didn't even think about that. And so I think having that understanding of just like, oh, other people are important and are a resource that I can utilize.
Yeah, because I think it's impossible for you to have every answer, right? It's impossible for you to be able to do that. But if you have resources that will allow you to do that, and having the ability to think that, then you're able to accomplish more.
Exactly. If I had never gone through that point of being like, well, I need to talk to more people, I would have done the same thing of I hit that point and I'm like, well, I can't contact her, so now I don't know what to do. And so I feel like having gone through that and just sort of experiencing more things, I think the more like risks I've taken and the more decisions I've made, the more prepared I feel to make the next decision.
And having grown, do you think that that's something that has been a huge part of your life? And how do you feel that this thing, creativity, has allowed you to get to where you want to be? In other words, as a child, when you're growing up, you're drawing, you're painting, you're playing with Play-Doh and whatnot, you're not thinking, wow, these are these skills that I'm going to need for the rest of my life. But when you're older and you lack them, for example, I didn't talk to people for 3 months, then you start thinking, I think if I talk to people, maybe I can make friends, maybe they can give me ideas, maybe we can all grow together. Then we start to do that. Do you think that that has helped you in what you're doing today?
Absolutely. I feel a lot of the skills and stuff that I have, I've never had a good sort of reason that I had them. I had a friend once describe me in high school as very annoying because it felt like I could kind of do whatever I wanted. And
I find it interesting that your friend said annoying because I feel like it's more jealousy to a certain degree. But tell us, what did they mean by that?
And I also don't want to sit here and say that I'm like perfect in any means.
No, not at all.
I feel like there's a lot of things that I still need to work on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We all do.
I think that they just meant that it feels like I typically can pick things up very quickly and like I said earlier, just sort of adapt really fast to new information or new problems. But that's not something I actively sought out and tried to learn how to do. It was something that just sort of came as I was practicing art and practicing sort of observing the world and practicing thinking outside of the box. And all of those other abilities sort of came along with those things of just experience and learning.
And the reason I asked that is because one of the things, and I believe I mentioned it in the class that you were in, is when we have children, or when we're children, we're seen as sponges, right? We're individuals who are like constantly like soaking in stuff. They're like, oh my God, they do all kinds of things. They're like sponges. But when we get older, when we grow up, that may be when you're 15 or that may be when you're 50, you know, who knows? But when you grow up, you eventually lose that ability to be that sponge. And one of the examples that I give in class is, would you rather have your child grow up in a gray room for the first 5 years? Or would you rather have them grow up in a room filled with colors and things that can stimulate them and whatnot? And every single time, everybody wants to put their kid in a place full of stimulation. But when you get older, you always want to be in that gray box.
Right.
And that's where I think this show and the people that I bring in help people understand or get a better understanding of how this thing called creativity will help you in the end. And it's interesting because the individuals often get stuck in this place, and that's what we're trying to do, is to get people from getting stuck. So for you as an individual, being a student, do you think that having education and being in the realm of education and school is important for everybody, and having that creativity associated with it?
I think it really is. I think that school is supposed to be this place of learning. And so
Right.
a lot of what I've talked about is just the more information you have, whether that be through going out and experiencing it or like sitting in a classroom. I feel just having more resources and having more conversations about more varied topics is only good for the brain. I know
Knowledge
that
is power.
knowledge is power.
That's
I agree,
for sure.
100%. And I think that the word stuck is such a good word to use here, because I feel like, especially going back to that conversation we just had about me leaving a very technical field to go into art education, that was a decision I made after I felt like I unstuck my brain, where I was kind of feeling trapped in this realm of, this is what I've been doing, this is where all of my like energy has gone into, this is what has built my entire resume. I don't know how to abandon this thing. But
It's
it was
scary.
It was the moment that I went, you know, let me think about actually what it would be like genuinely to go into something else that I feel more passionate about, and what avenues could I realistically take to get there, and what parts of this thing that I've spent so much time into can I carry with me. And it was a lot more than I expected, honestly. And I think that just keeps happening to me, of just with talking to people also, of just people are scary. I don't know, sometimes people can be mean. I've always been kind of a weird kid. But then I started talking to people and I was like, oh, you know what? People aren't as bad as I thought they were going to be, and it's not as scary. And so ultimately the lesson I just kind of keep learning, it seems, is that you can have more options than you think, because some of the ones that you're cutting off aren't as terrifying or as negative as you might
And you'll always
initially
have
see.
them, I think, is what's interesting. You think, if I leave this, then it's going to be gone forever, but it won't be gone. It will always continue to be a part of who you are. But having said that, you actually took up something new recently.
I did.
And that goes along with the question that I asked generally towards the end of the program. I asked, do you have any advice for our public? So tell us what you took up and what your advice is from what you've learned.
So what I took up recently was skateboarding. I've only been skateboarding for maybe like 2 weeks, honestly. So I'm very new to it.
Yeah.
But I've been having such a blast. I've been skateboarding multiple times a day. I've figured I could get my dog to pull me on the skateboard. It's been so much fun, and I keep thinking that it feels so symbolic of so many of these lessons that I've tried to sort of learn over these past couple of years, of just not being so scared to try something new. Once I'm like up on the board, a lot of it is just focusing on staying loose, staying connected to the board, and just making sure I'm working on balance. And then when I fall off, making sure that I don't wait too long to get back on the board, but also if I'm like injured, call that, but not necessarily like too much, and not be too scared of getting back up and going again. Because the sooner I can get back on the board, the easier it's going to be for me to get rid of that anxiety and that fear. And so I guess my advice is just to stay loose, to stay sort of grounded as best you can. And if you fall off, don't worry about how bad it looks or how embarrassing that is, to just get back up and try again. Keep going.
And have you thought about that lesson that you're learning and how you're going to apply it to the future?
I have, actually. I think I already have started sort of applying that. I've been dealing with depression and anxiety. I'm very open about that. It's service related, and I've been going to therapy. And I've been thinking a lot about sort of these specific memories that I've been sort of stuck in from some specific negative things that happened in the military that don't affect me anymore. They shouldn't affect me anymore. They were years ago. I'm not in the military anymore. I don't plan to ever be in the military again. And so it's a lot of stuff that I don't have to be carrying with me. but I do because I for whatever reason, I feel stuck in those moments, and being able to sort of vocalize these words through the sort of metaphor of skateboarding, I feel like I've been able to focus less on those things, and when they do come up, be like, you know what, that's not necessary. I can sit here and focus on what I'm doing right now, as opposed to being stuck back there.
And one of the things that's interesting, this will be our last thought because we run out of time very quickly in this show, is, and I learned this just a few days, actually yesterday I learned this, that everything is beautiful in its time. Meaning, for me anyways, this is the way that I interpreted it, is that all things are beautiful even when they're not beautiful for us, like a negative situation, negative event that happened, transpired or whatever. But when we learn from that, that's when it becomes beautiful, because then we can understand why we went through that thing, you know, that specific event, that specific situation. And one example that I could give is the passing of my late wife. You know, when that happened, obviously it was a horrible situation, but it did give me the opportunity to be more creative, to be more open, to be stronger, to grow as an individual. So all things are indeed beautiful in their time. So I think it's very interesting that we had a beautiful conversation. We talked about a lot of really cool and creative things, and I want to thank you for taking the time out to come and talk to us. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
I did, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome, man. It was my pleasure. And I want to thank everybody for joining us again. My name is Miguel Valenzuela, and we always want you guys to keep coming back and watching our show. If you guys need to get in contact with me, you guys can email me at mvalen31@epcc.edu. And as always, we'll keep bringing you guys very interesting individuals to talk to. Thank you very much, and we'll see you guys next time.